Hello and welcome to another How to Code Well web chat. My name is Peter Fisher. Today we're going to do a run through of my presentation that I'm speaking at PHP South West. Now the presentation is titled How to Put Your Docker Image on a Diet. It's going to be in front of, I think, between 40 odd people or something like that. I haven't really done a technical talk like this in front of that many people, so I am a little bit nervous. But today I'm hoping to do a run through, a practice run of that. Now it's going to be a lightning talk, so it's between 5 and 10 minutes long. So I'm going to time myself. I'm also using this Logitech Spotlight that I got quite recently, which I'm pretty happy with. I've got a video on that coming later on. Okay, so I'm going to start the timer and then we're going to go straight to the presentation, and I'm going to try and do it without doing any kind of editing, and it needs to be within the 10-minute mark. So the next thing you're going to see is the presentation. Wish me luck. Good evening, my name is Peter Fisher. I'm a freelance web and mobile applications developer, the host of the How to Code Well YouTube channel, and the author of Docker in Motion, an interactive course from Manning Publications. Today I'm going to talk about how to put your Docker image on a diet. But what is the point in having a small Docker image? Well, two reasons really. The first is speed of deployment, and the second is cost, because the smaller your Docker image, the quicker it is to deploy. And obviously if you're using any kind of services that charge you for how much you use and what you use, then you're obviously going to reduce the amount of cost you've got by having a smaller Docker image. Now, Docker is not just about containers. In fact, a container is merely just an instance of a Docker image, and a Docker image, of course, is created and constructed from a Docker file, and that is what we're going to be focusing part of this talk around. Now, this slide I've taken from the Docker in Motion course. Here I'm explaining that a Docker image is merely like an onion in the sense that it has several layers, and each layer has something about the image that is being constructed. Now, for example, the different run instructions or different instructions of the Docker file will generate these layers and create these intermediate images, and I talk about all of that in far more detail in the Docker in Motion course. But the takeaway here is that depending on the layer type, you might have different run instructions or different labels and so forth, and they will consume different amounts of storage space. So for example, labels won't take up much storage space, but run instructions will do. So one way we can reduce the amount of space that we're consuming is by reducing the amount of run instructions that we're using. Now, what I'm going to demonstrate is 6 ways that we can reduce our Docker image, and each of these are tagged on the Docker Hub as well as in a GitHub repository, which I've linked here. Okay, so let's take a look at tag 0.1.0. Now, this is our original Docker file that we're going to base ourselves on, and as you can see that we have 6 run instructions, this cluster of 6 run instructions here. So what we can do is remove or merge some of these instructions into other instructions. We can see that we've started on 593 megabytes. So in tag 0.2.0, what we're doing here is we're merging down our 6 run instructions down into a single instruction, and we've managed to reduce this down to 588 megabytes. So not a huge amount, but it's going in the right direction, and this certainly demonstrates that just changing the Docker file without actually changing what it is that we're installing will help reduce the amount of disk space that we're using up. Okay, so another thing that I want to focus on is what it is that we're actually installing, because what we're installing here is Git as well as some other bits and pieces. I'm going to focus on Git for now. Git is what I term as a build package. This is a package that you use to build other things. So for example, you could be using Composer, and therefore you would need to have Git installed. But once all your dependencies have been installed, you no longer need to have Git. And so you should remove the build packages after you've used them. Another point I want to make is this PHP 7.0. So here we can see that 7.0 and then there's an asterisk here is being used. Now this is going to install everything that starts with PHP 7.0, and this should give us all nightmares because A, we don't know what we're installing, and B, we're probably going to be installing stuff that we don't use. So avoid anything with an asterisk in the Docker file. So in the next version, in the next tag, what we're doing here is we're only installing what it is that we need, and we've got this down to 314 megabytes in tag 0.3.0. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is actually focus on tidying up this Docker file, because when we're running the apt-get update command, what we're doing is we're generating a series of cache files, and they're used for subsequent apt-get update commands. And we don't actually need those because we're not going to be installing anything after this run instruction. And so what we can do is remove that and also remove anything else that we might be installing as perhaps a scaffold. So please clean up after yourself. So in the next version, tag 0.4.0, we've managed to reduce this down to 275 megabytes by simply removing what it is that we don't need. And here what I'm doing is I'm removing all the scaffolding packages using the auto remove, removing their config using purge, as well as recursively and forcibly removing all the cache files that the apt-get command has generated, because we don't need those. Okay, the next thing I'm going to focus on is our base image. Here we can see that we're using Ubuntu latest, but Ubuntu is actually quite a big package, and we can reduce this package considerably by we can reduce this base image considerably by just changing it, or we could take it to the nth degree and we could create our own base image with our own stuff. So in tag 0.5.0, what we're doing here is we're using the Debian stretch base image, because this is a smaller base image, and by doing so we've managed to get this down to 262 megabytes. Now the last tip that I want to give you, but there are many more, but I just couldn't fit them in this talk, is to look at the Docker ignore file. Now the Docker ignore file ignores files that match this pattern or these patterns from the build context, because what you're doing is when you're typing docker build, you're passing everything up into the build context. So here what we're doing is we're ignoring anything in the current working directory that has starts with a dot, as well as the temp and log folders. And we're also doing some clever things here. We're removing all the tests from the vendor directories. We're removing anything in a build directory. Now that build directory could be full of coverage reports and code analysis reports that we shouldn't have anyway in the production deployment. We're also removing anything in cache and logs, as well as removing the apt_dev thing. So each one of these generates a Symfony application. So here we're actually saying that we cannot access the development environment. So you can use the Docker ignore file in a way to remove sensitive information that you just don't want to put on your production deployment. And here we can see that we've managed to go 50% smaller from our original image. So our original image was 593 megabytes. Now we've got this down to 252. So in those small steps, we can make those giant leaps. Thank you ever so much. Does anybody have any questions? And then what I'm going to do after this is have some feedback on joined in. That QR code doesn't go anywhere, or doesn't go to the right place at the moment, but I haven't put it on joined in. I haven't put it on speaker deck yet. But that's the talk. It went for about 8 minutes 31. There was a couple of ums, there was a couple of ahs. There was a couple of things in there that I'm probably going to tweak and change, but I will be interested to hear what your feedback is on that talk. I'm going to be presenting this to PHP South West tomorrow on Wednesday. Hopefully the nerves won't get me, But thanks ever so much for watching, guys. Happy coding, and I'll see you again shortly. Cheers. Bye.